The Dead Sea is dying. Every year, the water drops another meter. Sinkholes the size of houses swallow the cracked earth. Entire shorelines have vanished. Governments promised solutions. Pipelines, canals, rescue projects. Nothing happened. The silence was deafening. But while world leaders debated and delayed, something started moving in the shadows of those sinkholes. Something alive. In water that kills everything it touches. Freshwater pools appeared, and in them, fish. Biologists are scrambling for answers, but believers already know what's happening. The ancient prophecies weren't symbolic, they were scheduled. The Dead Sea sits 430 meters below sea level, the lowest point on Earth's surface. For decades, scientists watched it shrink. The water level drops 1 meter every single year. That's over 3 feet. Gone. It had vanished into the desert air. The shore that existed in 1960 is now a mile inland. What was once deep blue water is now white salt flats, stretching into the distance, cracked, lifeless, desolate. But the real danger lurks beneath the surface. Underground, fresh water used to balance the salt water above. As the Dead Sea retreats, that fresh water shifts, moves, dissolves the salt layers below ground. The earth becomes hollow, and then it collapses. Sinkholes, over 6,000 of them, now dot the shoreline, some 20 feet across, some big enough to swallow a building. They appear without warning. One day, solid ground. The next day, gone. Tourists have died. Roads have disappeared overnight. Entire beaches, once packed with visitors, now sit abandoned behind warning fences. The Israeli government declared it a national crisis. Jordan called it an environmental catastrophe. International conferences were held. Plans were drafted. A canal from the Red Sea was proposed. A pipeline from the Mediterranean was designed. Billions of dollars. Decades of planning, and nothing was built. The Dead Sea kept dying. The sinkholes kept spreading. The silence from world powers grew louder. It seemed like the end of one of Earth's most unique wonders. A slow, inevitable death witnessed in real time. But then researchers climbing down into those sinkholes to study the collapse found something that stopped them cold. Water. Not salt water. Fresh water. And it wasn't alone. The first reports came from Israeli geologists in 2011. They were mapping sinkholes near Ein Gedi, a settlement on the western shore of the Dead Sea, and the same place where David hid from King Saul 3,000 years ago. They descended into a newly formed crater and found a pool of crystal-clear water, fresh water, surrounded on all sides by earth saturated with salt, in a region where the Dead Sea itself is 34% salt, 10 times saltier than the ocean. Salt so concentrated it burns human skin. Yet here was water you could drink. The geologists tested it, drew samples, analyzed the mineral content. Fresh water, no question. But that wasn't the shocking part. Swimming in that water were fish, small fish, alive, thriving, in the shadow of the Dead Sea, where nothing has lived for millennia. At first, scientists thought they were mistaken. Contamination, maybe. The fish must have come from somewhere else. Equipment carried them in. Groundwater connected to a distant source. But more sinkholes were explored. More freshwater pools were found. And more fish. Different species in different locations. Some pools had tiny minnows. Others had larger fish nearly 4 inches long. Biologists couldn't explain it. The water chemistry was tested again and again. Fresh, drinkable, life-sustaining. But how? Underground springs, some suggested. Aquifers shifting as the Dead Sea recedes. Fresh water that's been trapped below the salt for centuries finally breaking through. Maybe, but that doesn't explain the fish. Where did they come from? How did they travel through solid rock? Through layers of salt that should kill them instantly? No one knows. The scientific community remains baffled. News outlets reported it as a curiosity, a strange quirk of nature, an environmental footnote to the larger crisis. But for those who know Scripture, this was no accident. This was a page turning in a book written long before science existed. A book that predicted this exact moment. His name was Ezekiel, a Hebrew priest carried away to Babylon when Jerusalem fell in 597 BC, exiled, defeated, watching his nation collapse. And in that darkness, God gave him visions. One vision was so specific, so detailed, that for 2,600 years, people struggled to understand it. Ezekiel saw the temple in Jerusalem, rebuilt, restored, and from beneath its threshold, water began to flow. Not a lot at first, just ankle-deep, but as it traveled east, toward the desert, it grew, knee-deep, waist-deep. A river so deep you couldn't cross it. That river flowed down through the Arabah Valley, the Jordan Rift, straight toward the Dead Sea. And then Ezekiel saw something that seemed impossible. The angel guiding him said this water flows toward the eastern region, goes down into the valley, and enters the sea. When it reaches the sea, its waters are healed. Ezekiel 47:8. Healed. The Dead Sea, healed. The angel continued, swarms of living creatures will live wherever the river flows. There will be large numbers of fish, because this water flows there and makes the salt water fresh. So where the river flows, everything will live. Ezekiel 47:9. Read that again. Large numbers of fish in the Dead Sea, because the water becomes fresh. For centuries, scholars treated this as symbolic, a metaphor for spiritual renewal, a poetic picture of God's grace bringing life to dead hearts. Because the Dead Sea doesn't support life, it's a scientific fact. The salt concentration kills bacteria, kills algae, kills everything. Nothing survives in that water. Ezekiel's vision seemed beautiful but impossible until 2011, when fresh water appeared in the sinkholes, when fish started swimming in pools at the Dead Sea's edge. Suddenly, the impossible was visible. But here's what makes this even more stunning. Ezekiel wasn't alone. Another prophet, Zechariah, saw the same thing 50 years later. Writing around 520 BC, Zechariah described a future day. On that day, living water will flow out from Jerusalem, half of it east to the Dead Sea, and half of it west to the Mediterranean Sea, in summer and in winter. Zechariah 14:8. Two prophets, different times, same vision. Water from Jerusalem healing the Dead Sea. Now look at what's happening on the ground. All the state of Israel was reborn in 1948. After 2,000 years of exile, the Jewish people returned to their land, exactly as the prophets predicted. Jerusalem is back in Jewish hands since 1967, and now, at the edge of the Dead Sea, life is returning. The pieces aren't symbolic anymore. They're geographical. They're biological. They're real. But this isn't just about fish and fresh water. There's a pattern here that goes back to the very beginning. The Dead Sea region wasn't always dead. In the time of Abraham, around 2000 BC, the Bible describes this valley as well-watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord. Genesis 13:10. Green, fertile, beautiful. That's why Lot chose to settle there. It was prime real estate. But the cities of that valley, Sodom and Gomorrah, became so wicked that God sent judgment. Bashir fell from heaven. The cities were destroyed. The valley was transformed into a wasteland, and the Dead Sea became a lasting memorial to that judgment. For 4,000 years, it has remained lifeless. A stark reminder of what happens when people reject God completely. But God's pattern throughout Scripture is never just judgment. It's judgment, then restoration, exile, then return, death, then resurrection. Look at Israel itself, scattered across the nations for 2,000 years after rejecting their Messiah. The land became desolate. Mark Twain visited in 1867 and called it a hopeless, dreary, heartbroken land. But God promised through Ezekiel, "I will take you from the nations and gather you from all the countries, and I will bring you back into your own land. I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean." And I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. Ezekiel 36:24-26. Physical restoration, spiritual restoration, both promised, and both happening right now. The land is blooming again. Israel exports produce across the world. Forests are growing where deserts once stretched. The people are returning. Over 9 million Jews now live in Israel, and many are recognizing Jesus as Messiah. Messianic Judaism is growing faster in Israel than anywhere on earth. The dead land is coming alive. The Dead Sea is showing signs of life, and dead hearts are being made new. The pattern is unfolding exactly as Scripture said. But is this really prophecy or just coincidence? Skeptics always dismiss prophecy. You're reading into it, they say, finding patterns that aren't there. But biblical prophecy has a track record. Take the city of Tyre. In 586 BC, the prophet Ezekiel declared that Tyre would be destroyed. Its stones and timber and soil would be thrown into the sea. It would become a bare rock, a place for fishermen to spread their nets, and it would never be rebuilt. Ezekiel 26:4-5, 12, 14. At the time, Tyre was one of the most powerful cities in the world. Wealthy, fortified, protected by the sea, impossible to destroy completely. But in 332 BC, Alexander the Great laid siege to the island fortress. He couldn't reach it by sea, so he did something insane. He took the rubble from the mainland city, the stones, the timber, the very soil, and built a causeway out to the island. Threw it all into the water, exactly as Ezekiel said. Tyre fell. The city was destroyed, and to this day, the ancient site remains bare rock. Fishermen still spread their nets there. Prophecy fulfilled, word for word. If Ezekiel's prophecy about Tyre came true with that level of precision, why would we doubt his vision of the Dead Sea? And it's not just Ezekiel. The Apostle John, writing the book of Revelation 2,000 years ago, saw a similar vision. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Revelation 22:1. From Genesis to Revelation, the Bible speaks of living water flowing from God's presence, bringing healing, bringing life. And now we're watching it begin. Not in a distant future, right now. The Dead Sea is still dying. The water still drops every year. But at its edges, in the broken places, in the collapse zones where the ground gave way, life is appearing. All fish that shouldn't exist are swimming in water that shouldn't be fresh. Ezekiel saw this moment 2,600 years before it happened. He also saw what comes next. He saw a river so powerful it turns the entire Dead Sea fresh. He saw fishermen lining the shores from Ein Gedi to Ein Eglaim. He saw fruit trees growing along the banks, producing every month, never failing. He saw the glory of God return to the temple, and he saw the name of Jerusalem changed forever. The Lord is there. We're not at the fulfillment yet, but we're watching the first drops fall. The question isn't whether the prophecy is true. The question is, are you ready for what happens when the river becomes a flood?